What's up, y'all? Welcome back to another episode of Point Forward. Myself, Andre Iguodala, and my main man, Evan Turner.
Yo.
And we have a very exciting guest today, somebody that, I've been hearing his name for a very, very long time throughout the course of my life and my journey through basketball. ET has dealt with him personally with a business relationship.
Mm-hmm.
This guy he was at the forefront of his business. He was responsible for some of the top names in basketball. Michael Jordan, over 100 players he's represented throughout his career. Some of the more notable names: Charles Barkley, Allen Iverson, Patrick Ewing, Alonzo Mourning, Dikembe Mutombo, Jalen Rose, John Stockton, Dominique Wilkins, and James Worthy. Evan Turner as well. He had a little break in there in between, but he was responsible for the first ever $100 million contract in professional sports, not professional basketball, but professional sports, as well as the first ever $1 million shoe deal, which was with James Worthy. Not too many people know about that. If any of you watching the Winning Time, the show on HBO, speaking about the Lakers, we should be hearing about James Worthy soon. We haven't got to him yet, but was listed by Sporting News for 12 straight years. One of the 100 most important people in all of sports. At one point in the 90s, this guy he was a lead agent for 40 players and was often referred to as the second most powerful person in the NBA behind Commissioner David Stern. And in 1992, his established Fame agency, he established, and eventually in 98, 6 years later, he sold it to SFX and became a chairman of SFX until 2001. And they started doing a lot of mergers and acquisitions. We'll dive into that later on, where they represented SFX did, because I was a part of that. Around a third of the NBA was represented by SFX. And the San Francisco Chronicle guessed that Falk had his hands in. I just said his name. 20% of NBA trades is in his hands, and he had the power to maneuver a lot of different things. So welcome to the show, Mr. David Falk.
Delighted to be with you guys.
So, David, it's funny. The legendary Kevin McHale said that if a nuclear bomb was dropped on Earth, two things would survive: cockroaches and David Falk. What do you think about that? Does that say you're resourceful, or are you just big on Darwinism?
Kevin made that comment during a very brief period of time when we represented one of his players, Stephon Marbury. It was the first guy I ever resigned from in my career. And Marbury didn't want to stay in Minnesota. I called Flip, who's my friend, who's the coach. I said, look, you go know this guy better than I do. He's pounding me to get him traded. He said, oh, don't worry about it. He'll change his mind like in 5 minutes. But he didn't. And Kevin was very, very upset and blamed it on me, which I understand. One of the things I had to learn, guys, when I was very, very young, John Thompson, who's my male mentor in life, called me into his office when I was about 35. And he said, son, you have a very serious problem. And right away, I got nervous. When a guy like John tells you have a problem, I said, what's the problem? He said, let me ask you a question. Do you want people to like you? I said, of course. That's a very basic human instinct. He said, quit the business. If that's what you want, quit the business. When you walk in the door and ask a rich white owner to pay a guy like Allen Iverson $100 million, he's going to hate your guts. And if that impedes your ability to get Allen what he's worth, you have to quit. Don't worry whether people like you. Your clients will love you, but the owners need to respect you. And so Kevin and I later on developed a great relationship. He was very upset over the Marbury situation. Wasn't one of the great things I want to put on my tombstone, Evan. Sort of like Michael had a quote similar to that, and they did a story on me in USA Today. And Michael said, David can be an asshole, but he's my asshole. And I said, Michael, you're a pretty articulate guy. Do you think you can come up with another description that's a little more flattering? But he meant that as a compliment. And I think Mikhail, said that out of extreme frustration and disappointment. But I always believe it's best to be upfront. And I knew Marbury was serious. I didn't know how to evaluate it because I hadn't really dealt with him for a long time. And I understood why Kevin was upset. He destroyed a really good young team with Marbury and KG.
Garnett, yep.
Yeah. He wanted Garnett money, though. Everything was Garnett money, right?
Well, the problem was that it's an interesting story because they changed the rules and they put the max in. And so there wasn't a person alive that could get Marbury Garnett money. It just wasn't available. And I told him that. And he said, well, if I can't get it, I can't be on the team with KG because I'm better than KG. Now, I don't think a person alive except his family thought that Stephon Marbury, who was a very talented young player, was in the same league as KG. And my job as an advisor to guys like you is to always be honest. And a lot of times players are going to resent you being honest because everyone around them is stroking them 9 to 5 and telling them what they think they want to hear. And frankly, I think most of the agents do the same thing. I think they tell their players whatever they think they want to hear so they don't get mad at them. But you don't need to pay somebody money and fees to tell you what you want. You could look in the mirror, Evan, and say, am I the best player in the history of the NBA? Yes. Now, if that makes you happy, it's great. No one else is going to think that. But you don't have to pay a guy like me, hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions to tell you that because it's just wasting your time.
So with that being said and everything you knew, what made you want to become a sports agent?
That's a great question. So from a very young age, I always wanted to be a lawyer. I really don't know why. Like, no one in my family was a lawyer. My dad was a butcher. He never finished high school. My mom was a teacher. And probably from the time I was about 10 years old on, without sounding like a cornball, I didn't want to be a baseball player. I didn't want to be an astronaut. I didn't want to be a politician. I always wanted to be a lawyer. And when I got to college at Syracuse, I loved sports. I was a sports junkie, like all through my teens. And the first day of school, I met the 2-star recruits on my dorm floor at Syracuse, the 2-star basketball players, sort of romantic notion that we were all seniors, that they'd go pro and I'd be their agent. And one of them did go pro. But by the time I was like 21, I knew what most young agents today don't know. I knew I had no clue about the business, other than the fact that I love sports. So I went to law school and I started meeting a lot of people in the business. Now, this is going to sound like the Stone Age to your listeners, but I started law school in 1972. The business of sports representation truly started in 1969. A guy named Mark McCormick signed 3 great golfers named Arnold Palmer, Jack Nicklaus, and Gary Player. And he started the largest company in the world called IMG, International Management Group.
Yep.
And he is really the godfather of sports representation, guy I really admire a lot. And so when I started looking for a job in law school, most people in the business were single practitioners. They weren't in these big firms like we had, like Wasserman or SFX, like you have today. They were by themselves and they weren't hiring anybody. And nobody was banging my door down, Dre, to hire a guy who went to Syracuse and GW Law School. They were looking for people from Harvard and, Princeton. So I ended up meeting a guy in Washington, D.C. named Donald Dell, who had been the Davis Cup captain when tennis first went pro. And like McCormick, his first clients were Arthur Ashe and Stan Smith, who are 2 of the great tennis players of all time. And when I tried to get a job with him, and I called him, like, players, what's the number one complaint players make about their agents?
Endorsement deals?
No, come on. They can't get them on the phone, right?
Oh, yeah. No, I got my agent on the phone. Yeah. Hey, it's Kobe calling. That's what I did. He picked up.
That's why you're a smart guy. But, so I tried to get this guy on the phone to meet him. And he had every excuse you could ever imagine. He's in a meeting, he's out of town, he's with a client, he's in the bathroom. And one day I got so frustrated. I got a bunch of change when they had payphones. And at the law school library, I just kept, every 50 minutes, kept dropping the change and calling him. And after like 2 hours, when the secretary ran out of excuses, he finally agreed to meet me. And he told me they weren't hiring people with my credentials. So I went to work for him for free in the summer between my second and third year of law school. And I worked for him for 17 years, and the pay didn't get much better than it did the first summer when I was working for free, but it gave me a great experience in the business.
That's true.
So what made, in terms of like, starting your own agency, when did it click for you that you were better than other agents? Or when did you start thinking outside the box in terms of how you approach the business? Because you did a lot of things that were just very different. And I want to know at what point, like, when did you identify that you were who everyone else saw you as? You know what I mean?
That's a great question, Dre. So in sports, in team sports like baseball, football, basketball, there's a system called slotting. So if you're, I believe, with the 9th pick in the draft, and historically people say you should get a little less than the guy goes 8 and a little more than the guy goes 10. And so after being in the business for 3 or 4 years, I thought, wow, why does a guy like Evan Turner need to hire me if his deal's being done by the 2 guys on both sides of him? I had nothing to do with it. And so I decided I didn't want my clients to be slotted. And so as someone who had majored in economics, I try to come up with what I would call rudimentary analytics. I wanted to look at what was going on. So in 1982, the NBA instituted the salary cap for 60 years, and then for the rest of the league in 83. And I came to view the growth of the salary cap as what they would call in the Council of Presidential Economic Advisors, the leading economic indicator. So if the cap went up 30%, and you were the number 2 pick in the draft and the national player of the year like Evan Turner, and you could negotiate your deal before the wage scale, you would expect to get a much bigger increase over the guy at number 2 last year than if you're the guy number 29, because number 2 is considered a pretty special player. So in 1982, ironically, and you mentioned his name, James Worthy was the number 1 pick in the draft. He was the only player in the history of the NBA ever, before or since, to be the number 1 pick in the draft, drafted by a team that had just won the championship. Trade. And so we were very friendly with the owner of the Lakers before he bought the Lakers because of tennis. Jerry Buss, who's a genius in financial affairs. And Worthy got an enormous contract, no pun intended, worthy of the fact that he was an anomaly. 3 years later, Patrick came out, and he was the number 1 pick the first year they ever had the lottery, when they would try to prevent the teams from tanking.
Yep.
And he was the very first really big client I got totally on my own. John Thompson liked me, and he wanted to go with the underdog. He didn't meet my boss. He met me, and he wanted me to have Patrick. And I wanted to reward his confidence in me. And so I spent about a month trying to figure out what was appropriate for Patrick. Now, at the time, the highest paid rookie in the history of the league was Akeem Olajuwon, who got drafted number 1 the year before, made $1.2 million a year for 6 years. And the highest paid veteran was Kareem, who made $2 million a year. And I asked the Knicks to pay Patrick $3 million a year for 10 years. And they laughed me out of the office. But what had happened, and this is almost comical, is that when they won the lottery, which takes place exactly 45 days before the draft, the head of marketing for the Knicks, a guy named Jim Trecker, called me up and asked me for permission.
Yep, I know the story.
Picture on the New York season ticket brochure.
Yep.
I thought he was teasing me, but he was serious. So I said, of course you can put it on. So in the first meeting where we're at a complete loggerheads, and the head of the Knicks thought I was on crack cocaine asking for $3 million for rookie, a guy walks in the office. I didn't know who he was. And he says something to Jack Krupke, who was the head guy. And as he starts walking out, I said to Jack, excuse me, who is that guy? He said, oh, David, that's Jim Trecker, the head of marketing. I said, Jim, come on back in here. How are we doing with the season tickets? Oh, I goes, David, it's amazing. We've sold $6 million worth of new season tickets like in the last 60 days.
Yep.
So I said to the 2 guys we were negotiating with, if we're asking for $3 million a year and you've sold $6 million of tickets already,
yeah,
you should probably ask for $8 or $9 million a year. This is like way below what his value is. And so he signed for $3.2 million a year for 10 years and had the very first ever early termination option in a sports contract.
No, say that again. The first ever what?
ETO, where a player has the option to terminate early.
Yep.
Because even though it was so much higher than anyone got, I knew, based on my experience in the business from over the last 10 years, that the minute he signed that, everyone would use that as a base and try to negotiate off it. So he became the highest paid player of all time before he ever dribbled the ball. 5 years later, we did the exact same thing with Danny Ferry, who didn't become as good a player as Patrick Ewing, but he was in that unique leverage position. So we had basically inverted the market. Instead of the veterans making the money, the rookies who had a special position, I was able to turn the marketplace upside down. And all the veterans were getting upset. And I said, why are you upset? There's no free agency. At the time, every player who was a free agent, the team that he was coming from could match. So no one even got offers.
Oh, okay.
2 or 3 guys a year didn't get offers.
Right.
So they didn't change that till 96. And so I try to explain to the veterans and the union, somebody has to set the market. There's got to be a market leader. And if the veterans don't have the leverage because no one's going to make them offers, and these special rookies have the ability to get special contracts, let the rookies set the market. And then if you're Kareem and you say a guy who's never played a game is making $3 million, I've won 4 championships, what should I make? And so the union by this time was semi-dysfunctional. A guy that Evan went to the same high school with, I think destroyed the union when he was the president by turning the players and the agents against each other because he hated agents. And I don't blame him. I hate most of them too, but it's a fact of life. So they put in a rookie wage scale in 1995.
Yep, the rookie scale. Chris Webber, it was right before Chris Webber, or right after Chris Webber? Oh, yeah. So Chris Webber was the reason. Chris Webber and Glenn Robinson was the reason why they set the rookie scale, because those guys were getting $100 million out the gate.
Yeah. Actually, yeah. Was it Cole? What did Cole say about the $100 million to Glenn Robinson?
Yeah, he asked for $100 million. So Big Dog was represented by Magic's agent, Dr. Tucker, who's a fun guy. I like Dr. Tucker.
Mm-hmm.
And he asked the owner of the Bucks, Herb Cole, who's a senator from Wisconsin, for $100 million. And one of the funniest lines in negotiating history, Herb said to Dr. Tucker, let's reverse it. You give me $100 million and you could own my team. So he got 68 for 10. Now,
okay.
You were asking why I thought I'm a numbers person. I'm a lawyer. So a lawyer proves his case by evidence, right? Not by hot air. So in 1994 was the last year before the rookie wage scale. Weber got a terrible contract as a rookie. He signed a 15-year deal at number 1, and Penny Hardaway signed a 13-year deal at number 3. And in the first 8 years of the deals combined, 1 and 3, they made less than I got Sean Bradley, who was the number 2 pick. Combined. Now they both got it out, and they did it again.
Yeah, they got it out.
Yeah. But in 94, we represented a great guy who's now coaching Michigan named Juwan Howard. He was the 5th pick in the draft. So Big Dog got $68 million for 10. Second pick was Jason Kidd, who got $54 million for 9, $6 million a year. No outs, either of those 2 guys. Grant Hill was 3rd, 54 for 9 with an out after 6. Daniel Marshall was 4th. He got about $4 million a year. After 9 years in the league, Juwan Howard earned all the guys ahead of him by a minimum of $47 million.
Okay, so let's break that down. Now, that was my next question for you, right? So where was the foresight in that particular deal? Because I know, your book is called The Ball Truth. You wrote a book. What year did that come out?
2009.
2009. Oh, I got it right that time. I found the book last night, and I
gotta tell you, and I told this to your assistant, Patience. The day you came up to me,
my business partner, Patience.
Okay,
but go ahead. I want to give it the right title. That's all. I just want to give it the right title.
No, that's real. That's real.
Yeah.
Shout out to Patience.
I apologize.
Said, okay.
I was having lunch in Philadelphia with Elton, who's like my brother. Elton and I are really close.
Yep.
You came up to our table and said, Mr. Falks, once I enjoyed your book. I almost fainted that a guy who wasn't a client, and that really impressed me that you had the curiosity to read that. And that really sort of jump-started my respect for you as a business person, not as an athlete. You asked me what gave me the foresight. So having been in the business from 75 to 94, I knew the market was changing at warp speed. And whatever seemed big wasn't going to stay big because everyone used that as a starting point down the road. So we had World War III with the Wizards over Juwan because of Big Dog. So Big Dog had asked for 100. The owner of Washington was the senior owner in the league, senior owner. And it incensed him that a player would ask for $100 million. And so he came out publicly as we were negotiating Juwan's deal and said, this rookie negotiations have gotten completely out of control. As the senior owner, it's my job to bring normalcy back to the thing. So we asked for a deal for Juwan for $4,025,000 a year for 6 years, which was a very vanilla deal. We had to pick their pick the year before, who was the National Player of the Year, Calvin Chaney from Indiana. We got $3 million. And it was a no-brainer. Juwan should have gotten $4 million. So they offered him a 3-year deal for $3 million. And we fought all summer. He didn't sign until 7 games into his rookie year.
Oh, it was a holdout.
Then he signed a deal for $42 million with an out after 2 years. So we had it was a way better deal than we would have given him if they had just taken the $4 million.
Yep.
Made the All-Star team his second year. Now, I have to interrupt myself if I can, okay? So we met Chris Webber's family when he came out of Michigan. It was Mother's Day, May 10th, 1993. I can remember like it was yesterday. We met his parents, his aunt, Charlene Johnson, her boyfriend, Falish Irwin, who became Webber's agent, the dean of the law school, the dean of the B school, and Coach Fisher. The only person that didn't come was the player. Webber didn't even show up. Now, we had already signed Sean Bradley, who we had never met, Dre. We never met Sean Bradley. He had a very wealthy businessman on his religious mission in Australia. He was in Australia for 2 years. And the guy said, look, we can't have agents coming over in the middle of this mission. So he called 10 owners in the Western Conference of the NBA and said, if this were your son, who would you pick to be his agent? And all 10 said, oh, it's easy. You'd pick David. Like, he's the best. So he picked us and signed with us. We'd never even met him. And a famous New York basketball writer, Pete Vesey, wrote in the Post that Bradley was going to be the second pick, and I would get him more money than Webber got as the first pick. Now,
shout out to BYU. They call it the Silicon Slopes. They got some heavy hitters in the tech space right now. I got a close eye on them, man. Yeah. Ryan Smith, Josh James. They got some heavy hitters. Clark Miyazaki. So yeah. But they got some. They understand business, so they got the right guy.
Yeah. So anyway, so I never said that, but Vesey wrote it just to be funny. That's his job. So we went to meet Chris. All the agents told Chris's family, instead of saying, hire me because I'm the best, they said, whoever you hire, don't hire David because he's got Sean Bradley, which is a pretty stupid way of promoting yourself if you think about it, And so I could tell that his parents really believed all these other guys. So I asked them the following question. I said, generally speaking, most great players coming out of high school want to go to college. And what do they want to be? They want to be the man, right? But somehow, I don't know how they got this done. At Michigan, Chris, Jalen, Juwan, King, and Jackson all decided, let's all get together. And they got to the NCAA finals as freshmen and sophomores. Never happened before. And so I try to tell his parents that there are laws in America that prohibit monopolies by aggregating assets of big companies. They think it's anti-competitive. So I said, if one agent represented all the top 5 players, like the Fab Five, every one of them would make way more money than if each of the 5 picked separate agents, because that guy would control the market. And they didn't believe me. And I knew they didn't believe me because they'd been programmed by all the agents that came before. So I got so frustrated, I left. And I told his parents, look, this is a waste of my time. I'm going to leave now and go home and spend the rest of Mother's Day with my wife. But before I leave, I just want to say one thing. Your son is going to get drafted number 1, and Sean Bradley is going to get drafted number 2. And when I get Sean Bradley more money than your son, you're going to know that everyone looked in the eye and lied to your face, which is exactly what happened. So the next year at the All-Star game in Minneapolis, I bumped into Chris's dad, Macy. He came up to me and he said, "You mind if I have a word with you?" I said, "Sure." He goes, "I can remember our meeting in Ann Arbor like it was yesterday. I thought you were the most arrogant, cocky MF I've ever met in my life. But everything you said at the meeting came true. So if you want a recommendation for any player in America, I would be honored to recommend you." And I said, "Mr. Weber, first of all, I'm not an arrogant person by nature, and I'm not cocky. I'm confident, but I don't think I'm cocky. You guys were drinking the Kool-Aid, and I was trying to like, wake up. You're hearing that is complete BS. It's not going to happen." And I was frustrated. But if you really want to recommend me to someone, why don't you recommend me to Chris Webber, who's got it out after the first year of his deal, and let me do it the right way. But it didn't happen. So Chris gets traded to Washington. After his second year, he signs a 6-year deal for $57 million, which everyone thought was like a gangbusters. $9.5 million a year. It was the second biggest deal in the league to Patrick, who was betting 12.2. Except that 1 year later, Juwan Howard, his teammate at Michigan and in Washington, signs for $15 million a year for 7. Now think about this. People always make excuses why Patrick made a lot of money because he's playing for the Knicks, or Kareem's make a lot of money because he's a center, or whatever. So these are two guys that are born 2 weeks apart. 2 weeks. They're both 6'9". They both weigh 250. They both played power forward, and they both signed with the exact same pro team 12 months apart. One guy makes 60% more money than the other. And in college, if you said, "Who's that going to be?" who would they say it was going to be? It's going to be Chris Webber, except it was Juwan Howard. And so when people say, I think that if I asked you, who's the greatest scorer in the history of the NBA, my guess is you tell me the guy who scored the most points, right?
Right.
You wouldn't tell me some guy you think has a pretty, John McLaughlin, I think had the best jump shot in the history of the NBA, but he's not the greatest scorer in the history of the league. The evidence would prove you wrong. And so when people ask me, why do you think you had a certain position as an agent? It's because our clients, not the great ones like Jordan and Ewing, but guys like Juwan Howard, Alonzo Mourning, Sean Bradley, Big Country Reeves made ridiculous amounts of money because we had a really good group of people who were good negotiators.
All right. I hear what you're saying, and good negotiating. And we've had a few guests on before, and it wasn't quite crystal clear in what is good negotiating. So let's fast forward today's time. All right. You got all these young guys coming out, now it feels more like you're getting paid off what you could possibly be and not really what you are. Now, walk me through negotiations of a guy who's not quite a max guy. And also the other question, 2 questions. How do you negotiate for a guy now? And here is the question I've been meaning to ask you. Does a player who makes first team All NBA 2 or 3 years consecutively, he's on the All-Star team every single year, one of the up and coming players, do they need an agent? And why?
Great question.
Because the Supermax is already set in place.
So let's go to the beginning. So I think that in today's NBA, when there's a rookie wage scale for players coming in, and there's a max for the superstars like LeBron and Curry, those kinds of players, and there's minimums for the fringe players, 70% of all the contracts in the NBA are not negotiated at all. They're just deals, maximums, minimums. And so the role of an agent has dramatically declined in the last 10 years. I wanted to meet Zion Williamson when he came out of Duke to tell him that he didn't need an agent. He needed what you're doing and what Kevin Durant's doing. He needed a business manager because he's going to get a deal. If he became who he's supposed to become, he's going to get the max with his eyes closed. Yep. And you need someone to manage your marketing. You need someone to manage your money, and maybe to try to set up early the kinds of things you're doing now, Dre, and that Kevin Durant's doing now, which I really admire. Yep. Venture capital to prepare yourself for life after basketball. So I think today, the role of an agent has been dramatically curtailed by the regulations in the NBA. And I think a lot of the regulations that they've passed, frankly, are very inimical to the growth of the game. I think the dumbest rule the owners have ever put in is the max. Now, they put it in 98 because they're afraid of guys like Iverson and Kobe were going to make like so much money. But because players have to make 50.1%, when you steal the money from LeBron, Curry, Durant, Kawhi, those kinds of guys, Giannis, you have to spend it. And so the guys that are making 25 million probably should be making 10, but you have to spend the money. So the union has allowed the star players, it's like the Robin Hood theory of economics. You rob Peter to pay Paul. But the fans don't come to see anybody but the superstar players.
True.
The number 4 guy on the team, no disrespect, doesn't sell jerseys, doesn't sell tickets, doesn't sell, food at the arena. The superstars do that. I think LeBron, if you look at soccer, the best player in the world in soccer is like Messi.
Right.
2 years ago, he made $150 million.
Yep.
Now, if you ask me, who do I think has a bigger impact on winning a game, Messi or LeBron or Messi or Curry? Not even close. I think Curry's way more of an impact. And I think Curry should be in a fair market with no max. I think he should be making $100 to $150 million a year. Now, if that happened, then some of these guys that are making 20 and 30 million, we're making 10.
There'd be no middle class.
But the problem is the middle class, if you want to be honest about it, there's way more middle class players than there are superstars. There's only a handful of superstars in the NBA team, maybe 6. I think there are 6 superstars. There aren't 20. And that's because they let the players come out too early before they become skilled. They're talented, but they're not skilled. We told Evan Turner as a sophomore, go back to school. He had 13 other agents tell him, come out. Is that right, Evan?
Yep.
And he became the National Player of the Year. He did way better the extra year. Michael Jordan went back to school as a junior and became, in that year between his sophomore and junior year, I think he became the greatest defensive player in the history of the NBA other than Bill Russell. Dean Smith spent the whole year teaching to play defense. Go ahead.
So David, you think, I remember in your book, The Ball Truth, back in 98, 99, you were urging for the Players Association and agents to form together to go against the owners, correct? Was that something that you had to have happen? Was that something you wanted to clear out the max salary and make sure you get your players as much money as possible and kind of put a pecking order in the NBA? Because you always preach, even during the last lockout, you better look, bro, you're going to be the movie star. They're coming to see you. They're not coming to see
the 5th, 6th, 7,
like you said.
Let me answer you the most simplistic way, okay? I'm not going to name the guy, but in 2011, before the second lockout, you're talking about, I want to go backwards.
Okay.
That's the client I thought was our least intelligent client. I was trying to explain the dynamics of the lockout. So the players make 50.1% of the revenues, okay? And I said to him the following: if the most I'm allowed to charge you is 4%, that's the union will allow me to charge you more than 4%. And I want to make more money representing you. How can I do that? And he said, David, that's simple. You have to make me more money. And when you make me more money, your 4% gets bigger. I said, God, that's amazing. So let's go from the small to the large. So if the players as a group, all the players in the league are making 50.1 and they all want to make more money, how do they do that? And the answer is simple. They got to grow the business. So a really smart guy 6 years ago named Andre Iguodala called me one day and said, who do you think we should hire to run the union after Billy Hunter? And if you remember the conversation, Dre, I said, let's talk about the job description. You don't need a lawyer. You don't need someone bragging that they're going to kick David Stern's ass and collect. That will never happen. What you need is the former CEO of an international company who's a whiz-bang in marketing, who could sit down with the league and grow the business so that your 50.1% becomes much bigger. And they hired Michelle Roberts, who I have great respect for, but I don't think her skill set was what the players needed. I love the woman that you just hired. I think she's perfect, Tamika.
Now, I will say, I will say
Michelle was great at cleaning up a lot of stuff though too. We had a lot.
Yeah,
we had a lot of household stuff we had to clean up before
we had to get our
took
shit together.
Yeah.
Listen, I think Michelle
and she got our shit together.
I think she would have been great as a consultant. Think about this, okay? So an agent represents a player in individual contract negotiations. The union represents the players in collective contract negotiations, okay? Now, how many times in a 10-year period do you think we're going to have collective bargaining negotiations in the NBA? Once, twice?
Once, maybe once in an extension.
Okay, so in the rest of the time, when you're not negotiating collective bargaining, what's the role of the union leader? And the answer is to do all the internal things you're talking about, educate the players, help with the pensions, and the most important single job is to work with the league to grow the business internationally. I think basketball at roughly an $8 billion business is a third of what it should be. It's played in 220 countries around the world, including China and India, that has 35% of the world's population. There are more people every day who wake up and play basketball in China every day than there are people who live in the United States who play. There's more people who play than the people who live here. And Evan, as an expert in China, having been there 3 times, he could tell you.
So Evan, tell me about your tell us about your how your shoe deal worked and how you worked with David on, structuring that, because we have a lot of conversations in the group chat, Evan, about equity versus transaction. What I mean by transaction, you take the simple cash or check to use your likeness with a product, as opposed to the equity, which is you have ownership in a company. But it's been very rare that people do both or know how to execute both. So just kind of walk us through it.
So, I mean, back in the day, Falk and I met back in 2010 in downtown DC, and we were talking about endorsements and things like that. So obviously the shoe company was a big thing. And he was like, what are you looking for? And I was like, I guess my own shoe, like all that great stuff you hear, like my own shoe, my own line, like everything I saw as a kid, like your Jordan's agent, right? Like that type stuff. So one thing that you did say, you're like, well, to be honest with you, Nike probably doesn't have much money. The shoe market's down right now because of the financial crisis in '08 and all that other stuff. So a lot of the companies were kind of cutting back. And, he said, we're going to get you a deal. We'll definitely get you an amazing deal, and we'll create something cool. But what was so funny was when he brought in Brian Cups from Li Ning, and it was like, yo, there's a Chinese company. There's a Chinese company across the water that Shaq is signed with and Baron Davis is signed with. He's like, they're trying to start their basketball division. You'll for sure, have an opportunity to be marketed at a high level. But most importantly, they're giving you money and a lot of stock into the company. He's like, so when you break it down, I'm going to teach you the game, which I really appreciate because this was some real game. He said, you can go work for Nike right now and deal with Nike, and they're only going to give you $300,000. They're loaded with Kobe, Chauncey. This is like shoot, Dre, you were still around and you might not have got invited to the photo shoots. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
right.
It was that loaded. And then you come in with Brian Cups, who was offering around, like, what was it, like 20 million over 6 or something like that, 18, something like that.
At stock.
Yeah, with stock that to this day, like I told you, I checked recently, like 6 months ago, it's over 8 figures. You know what I'm saying? So it's definitely a little bit something taken back because I saw myself always in Nike, but when he's starting to tell me about, the business and being able to build a brand and market, and it was like, you don't understand, like you have a company that's willing to partner with you and allow you to grow and invest in yourself as your career goes. And it was one of those things where I called him recently and was like, yo, I didn't even see the vision back then when you were speaking about stock and all this. And to his credit, and I told my mom this as well, I was like, I don't think there was many people that would have foresaw that opportunity and was able to, make me rich for life, to tell you the truth. And if anything happened, whether I stopped playing after my 5th, 6th year, I still always had that stock in the company, and the opportunity to, had I turned out to be what I wanted to be, could have been $1 billion, you know what I mean?
Yep.
$1 billion company.
And then, I go back to, watching Winning Time, and Magic Johnson just spoke about this last week at the McDonald's All-American game, or was it 2 weeks ago? A couple weeks ago in Chicago. He was like, I could have got, they showed Phil Knight walking up to Magic and saying, hey, I got this shoe, man. And I started as a track runner at Oregon. I was mediocre. And, Bowerman was my coach. And we go into business together. And we learned that every ounce you shave off the shoe, that's 55 pounds per mile that you're shaving off your load on your body, which is, that's astronomical. Like nobody was quantifying, the shoe and aerodynamics back then. And they were kind of first at it. And he was like, but yeah, one of those other companies are going to tell you this and that, but how about you have a stake in this? Like it's going to be Magic. It was the first time he saw his name on his shoe, and he even took it to Converse and Adidas. Like, how about you call it the Magic? And they didn't see the vision, but if he would have took that stock back then, he was like, we're offering you 100,000 in stock, and the stock was at like 17 cents a share. That stock would be worth 5.2 billion right now. But, and then it talks about Spencer Hayward. He did a free ad and he got stock, but he ended up selling the stock early because, we didn't quite have the financial acumen back then as well. But then, interestingly enough, Magic said it himself. I didn't know what stock was when I got in the NBA, so I didn't understand what he was saying. So but when saying that, let's go into
that's the job of his agent. The job of his agent.
Correct.
Educate. To me, I'm a big Magic Johnson fan. He's a really nice person. And it's a crime that the most money, because of that crazy contract he signed, got to have made more than $2.5 million a year playing basketball. Okay.
Yeah, he signed a 25-year, $25 million contract.
Right. And okay, now I want to put you in history, okay? So Magic came out in 79. He signed a 5-year contract for $460,000 a year, $2.3 million. That was paid over 13 years in equal monthly payments by Jerry Buss, who is a genius in deferred money. After his third year in the league, the cap came in, Magic demanded an extension, and Buss gave him the $25 million deal, but it didn't start until his 6th year. Buss paid for that deal, okay, $25 million, by buying a mortgage for $3.2 million at 20% interest, funded Magic's whole contract for $3.2 million. Okay, so the contract started on November 1st, 1984. $1 million. I got interviewed by CNN right after he signed it. And I'll never forget it. They said to me, do you think this is the Armageddon of sports when an athlete can make $25 million in his contract? And I said, honestly, I don't want this to sound like sour grapes. Before this contract even kicks in 1984, Magic is going to be crying that he signed this deal. On September 20th, 1985, I signed Patrick Ewing for $3.2 million a year for 10 years before he ever played a game. Now, Magic Johnson won the national championship in 1979 against Larry Bird in what was then the highest rated basketball game in the history of basketball on television. He wins Rookie of the Year with Bird. He wins the NBA championship, scores 42 and 17 in the last game with that beautiful baby hook, and is named the freaking MVP. Now, if he retired at the end of that championship, in just 1 year between college and the pros, he'd be in the Hall of Fame. He had one of the most amazing careers in 1 year. And his name was Magic. No one had to invent Air Jordan. He was Magic from the time he was a teenager. He had the most amazing smile, one of the great personalities. He's playing. I mean, you couldn't script it better than to have that guy in LA. And the fact that he was with a group until later on when he saw him with Lon Rosen, who did a much better job, he was with people who didn't understand what Magic brought to the table and how to exploit the opportunity. And honestly, either did the guy who represented Larry Bird and the guy who represented Dr. J. No one had done those things before Jordan came along. And so what made Michael so special is he broke down every barrier that existed for race. Did Michael Jordan play for a great team as a rookie? They sucked. But the
cocaine circus.
He changed everything. And you guys both grew up in Chicago, so and he changed everything. But it's a crime to me, and I admire Magic post-basketball for really learning how to use his name and become a very successful businessman. Now, imagine how rich he'd be if he had done that in the 13 years he was playing.
Right.
And so to me, that's the job. When I was very young, when I was in my 20s and 30s, representing James Worthy and Michael and Patrick, to me, it was so much pressure to deliver for these guys that are the best in the world. And I wasn't. I was young. I was on the way up. I wasn't who I became later. And I knew I had to really, really deliver for these guys because they were putting their trust in me. And I knew that they were, what each of these is a once in a lifetime class. I had a lot of them. You mentioned them all. Dominique Wilkins, James Worthy. I mean, we had like 13 guys in the Hall of Fame. And I knew I couldn't just sit back and say, well, I got these guys. You had to really deliver for them. And it drove me relentlessly to try to match what they were doing on the court with what I was trying to do for them behind the scenes.
Well, David, you say that so easily. You say Michael Jordan, he broke down so many barriers and all that. Like, what gave you intuition, or like we said earlier, the foresight to even believe that anything like that was possible? You got Michael Jordan with McDonald's, you had him with Gatorade, all these national brands during a time where, the NBA was just coming out the shitter. And, at the same time, a Black athlete wasn't the number one thing that was marketed.
Yeah, dark-skinned Black athlete at that.
That's what I'm saying. And you came from helping with tennis players and everything like that. Was that something that inspired you, the one-on-one marketing with the tennis? Were you like, okay, I'm gonna make Michael Jordan? I think I read that you said Rod Thorne was like, what are you trying to turn him into, a tennis player?
And I said, exactly.
Yeah.
It was an evolution for me. Okay. So, I started when I was very young, and my first job was to be like the junior agent for Arthur Ashe and Stan Smith. I didn't do their deals. I tracked the royalty payments on their contracts. I helped them with their schedules. I probably did what Patience does with you, Dre. I was more like an administrator, if you will, than an agent. And so tennis players had everything. Arthur had his own racket, his own shoes, his own clothes, books, instructional stuff. I mean, he was a man of the world. He was a very special guy. And in many ways, I've told people very close to me that working for Arthur as a junior guy gave me a lot of insight into how to manage a guy like Michael Jordan. Now, Michael wasn't Michael in college. James Worthy was Michael. James Worthy was the best player on the team. He was the MVP. He was the guy. He was the best player in the state of Carolina probably for the time he was 13 years old on. And so we did the shoe deal for James, which is the largest in the history of the league. He made more money as a rookie from his shoe deal than Kareem and Magic, who were superstars on the same team. And so when Michael came along, the thing that really opened my eyes, two things opened my eyes. One was the Olympics. So he played in the Olympics, the last college team in America to win a gold medal, along with Patrick. I went to the final game, and you never saw Michael play like that at Carolina. The running joke was the only person who ever kept Michael under 20 was Dean Smith.
Yeah.
Right. And so, but in the Olympics, even playing for Bob Knight, the Spanish TV called him Rubber Man. He was doing dunks and stuff that no one had ever seen him do. And then we came home from the Olympics. I'll never forget this. And I had a meeting with his parents in Chapel Hill with him. And I laid out a plan. I said, you've just come back from the Olympics. You're a very all-American young man. You have come from a two-parent family, very hardworking people. You have 4 siblings. Yes, I understand he was African-American, but he was like the boy next door. He was good-looking. He was articulate. And I said, my plan is to use that all-American image and sign with the 3 most all-American companies in America: Chevrolet, McDonald's, and Coca-Cola. We're going to sign a shoe deal. We're going to sign a ball deal. And we're going to try with these 3 companies to start you off as an all-American hero as a rookie. The meeting ended, and he goes to Woolen Gym, which is the practice gym in Chapel Hill at the time. And he's playing a pickup game with Walter Davis, James Worthy, Dudley Bradley, the Secretary of Defense, Mitch Kupchak. And if you didn't know who anybody was, it looked like 9 guys like me playing against Kobe. I'm watching this. I cannot begin to believe that this guy, Michael, is dominating these pros. Dominating. It was like a high school guy, it was like an NBA player playing against high school guys. And it just blew my mind. I had no idea until that time that he had that kind of transformative power, and it woke me up.
So
to follow up with the Michael Jordan question and how you kind of made him bigger than life, larger than life. A lot of people kind of give him slack or flack. You saw that you read the book $40 Million Slave and everything. What do you say when you flip that and you they kind of say he kind of got so big he disconnected from the culture on certain avenues, and in a space where his stature back in the 90s was really needed to speak up for racial divide and racial situations, almost to the point where you fast forward like 20 years later when he was ready to speak up, a lot of players and stuff kind of are like, man, we straight right now. You know what I mean? Or they at least thought it was like a publicity scheme, even though he's had history of doing things behind the scene. But that's always been something that's been a crazy topic, a serious topic. And I think that you are pretty open and really have that discussion and say everything that's just real towards what you think.
I would say is that, let me start off with a foundation. So Michael, as he became really popular, we would get calls from charities. Can Michael make a one-day appearance for the Heart Foundation? Can make a one-day appearance for cystic fibrosis? And he probably got about 600 or 700 of those a year. Now, there's only 365 days a year. You have practice, you have games. You have to say no. You have to pick your spots. And the people you say no to think you're not being responsive to needs. And you can't please everyone. So you have to make a decision. What are you comfortable doing? And I always felt that no matter what Michael did, because he was so universal, people should say he should have done more. Some people thought he should have done less. Some people thought he should have done different. He should be more public, less public. And you can't live your life worrying what everyone else thinks of you. You have to do what you think in your heart of hearts is the right thing for you. And I think he did. And I think he suffered the criticism. I don't think he liked it. No one likes that kind of criticism. And the things he did mostly behind the scenes, and he was comfortable with them. And everyone has the right to question him or say he could have done more, could have done less. That's just human nature. When people put you on a pedestal, they immediately want to then pull you down, and they want to find all the flaws. And Michael is a human being, and he's not perfect. He made mistakes. And so I understand all the criticism, but I think he, as a man, had to decide where he wanted to spend his time, what causes he wanted to promote. And if they're genuine, no one can tell him, what he should be doing.
Now, I hear what you're saying, and I probably would have done it. Like, he kind of set the template on how do you conduct yourself as an athlete and conduct your business in terms of your endorsement. So that was it was like cookie cutter after that. Like, it was cut and paste. All right, here's the template on how an athlete should conduct himself. This is, you get married and you do this, and you just he kind of painted that picture of how to live as an athlete. Now you're the brains of the operation, correct? So now you go and get Allen Iverson, who I just had this conversation with someone last week or two, and I had to really think about it. Like, Allen Iverson was a cultural icon. Evan, do you remember the NBA's licensing on clothing? You had the jeans with every NBA team's logo on it. You had all the apparel, like Mitchell and Ness. All they put the dress code in because he was so influential in terms of, like, he was a Michael Jordan in his own right in terms of being a cultural icon. Now, walk me through what your approach with him would be in terms of how do you want his perception, or what would you like to see from his brand? Now, how do you brand Allen Iverson, and then how do you take that and move it into post-career play and have it extend into, decades and decades?
So first of all, I was honored to represent Allen for 2 years. His mother fired us after 2 years for being too tight with his money. And I love his mother. And she told me if I didn't give her a certain amount of money on a Friday afternoon, she was going to fire me on Monday. And I told her, Ann, you hired us to protect your son. The lockout's coming. I just can't do that. And she fired me on Monday. Now, she likes me. I see her. And Allen likes me. And if I had to do it again, I do the exact same thing, because that's my job. I think I'm going to say something that is going to reverberate. in my opinion, there's only 2 players in the NBA in the last 40 years that really sell shoes. One is named Michael Jordan, and the other is Allen Iverson. I think today, Allen Iverson, because he's such a cultural icon, is still one of the most marketable athletes in the world. And I saw he did a commercial for gaming recently. When you think of all the things Charles Barkley's doing,
yes,
it is enormous because he was a breakthrough kind of a guy. Now, I want to say this because maybe I should be more diplomatic. So when Allen came out of Georgetown and John, I recommended he go back to school for 1 more year. I knew he was going to be the #1 pick in the draft. And I told him, you're used to being in a cocoon at Georgetown where John keeps you away from the media. You're going to go to Philadelphia where you play, both of you, toughest media market in America. And you're going to hate it for 22 hours a day when you're not on the court and people are questioning all the things, which he did. And so he came out and John recommended us. Every black agent in America called John and blasted him for recommending us to Allen. And they said to John, this guy is the ultimate hip hop icon. David cannot relate to Allen Iverson. Now, I really resented that because I thought that was sort of like reverse racism. So, and one of the people said that were the Posted brothers, who represented Rashard Lewis the next year in the draft, who went like 37. The entire green room had emptied.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
I called John and I said to him, I never understood what the Postage meant that I couldn't relate to Allen. But tonight, for 2.5 hours, I watched him relate to Rashard Lewis while he slipped to number 37 in the draft and was crying on national TV. So I really resented that people felt that, that I couldn't. Now, I wasn't a hip hop aficionado. I didn't want to become a hip hop aficionado, but I was smart enough to understand the enormous appeal Allen had that resulted in him we didn't put him at Nike. Now think about this, okay? You talk about cookie cut. I think everything that's happened in the NBA from the day Michael started until today is cookie cut. I'm waiting for someone to be the next Michael Jordan, make 2.0, make the next model. So, Michael wore Converse in college and signed with Nike in the pros. Patrick Ewing wore Nike in college and signed with Adidas in the pros. The next year, the National Player of the Year was Johnny Dawkins, who I represented, who wore Adidas in college. I signed him with Avia. I didn't really give a damn what guys wore in high school at AAU. I didn't care what Evan wore at Ohio State. He wore Nikes. I thought the best deal for him was Li-Ning because of the opportunity to market him and the stock. And Allen, who was the state player of the year in both basketball and football in Virginia, was an amazing athlete. He was dying to go with Nike. John Thomas was on the Nike board, and we signed him at Reebok. And it was the biggest shoe deal in history at the time, $60 million. And he had his own shoe, several shoes. The Answer was called The Answer, and like his nickname. And it did phenomenally well. And so I wish I could have been involved with Allen the whole time, like I was with Michael and Pat. I think he would be all over the place right now in terms of marketability. And I think at age, he's probably about 50. Yeah. I think he's still amazingly marketable.
So, Falk, when you say relate, when you're talking about Post brothers, reverse racism, what do you mean by relate? In your book, you said one thing you shouldn't be is a spiritual advisor, But then you kind of compare that to a moment where you talk about Ben Gordon, and actually Andre is involved in that story as well, where he tells you to your face it's not always about money. But then, when you say his result to turn down the deals and things like that was money based. But
I would say
I think a distant thing is how you relate to a sense or that instance besides what the green is. When you go up to a dude like Allen Iverson, his background and everything like that, what makes you so sure you're comfortable enough to relate to the whole thing, when you're going in?
Great question. So I would answer the following way, and this will surprise both of you and certainly your listeners. Someone asked me what I thought my #1 responsibility was to my clients from the time I started at age 23. I'm now 71. It's a long time. I would say is to be a teacher, is to teach my clients the business of sports. So when their very brief career in sports ends, that they're competent to do the kinds of stuff that you guys are doing right now. I mean, Dre is a poster child for what I think, and I wasn't involved in him, so I'm using him as an example. The guy who's really reached out beyond the corners of the court to learn about business in Silicon Valley and interface with business leaders and hopefully make a hell of a lot more money from his non-basketball stuff than did playing basketball. And so, you know, I didn't ever feel my job was to be buds with my clients. Now, especially when I was very young, when I was 33 years old and I saw Michael Jordan and I saw how he reacted with all those college boys, I didn't want to be one of his buds, because if I then told him, get your ass on a plane and go to Nike, and he says, no, I don't want to go. Or I tell him, you know, you got to apologize when you got involved in a gambling thing. I needed him to respect me. So I wanted to hold myself at a certain, now, 20 years later, I wasn't worried about a kid who's 20 years old being buds with me when I'm 60. I got over that. But when I was very young, I was very sensitive to not being a bud, if I use that expression. And it didn't mean that I couldn't relate to them. It's a question of on what basis I wanted them to respect me. So when I told them the hard choices, which they didn't want to do, and I can give you 100 examples, I needed to know that they knew I was serious and that they respected my business acumen, and they knew that I was doing that for them. It wasn't for me. I was doing that to make them better, whether it was telling Glenn Rice to get off his lazy ass and go out to LA and win a championship, which he didn't want to do because he wanted to be the man in Charlotte, or having to tell Mutombo not to marry a girl because she hadn't signed the prenup. Those guys had to respect me. I could communicate with them. I think I'm a good communicator. And I didn't want to relate to them on an emotional level or on a social level like hip hop or anything. I wanted to relate to them as a trusted advisor.
Now I can respect that, but there's one thing I say on the show a lot. You know, I talk to all of my listeners who are coming from a more, you know, a different background as opposed to our culture. You know, we have a lot of listeners from the Bay Area or the Silicon Valley area or in the business space who, you know, trying to see inside the mind of an athlete. And I tell them all the time, like with journalism, you know, Evan, I always go back to this line. Evan said, you know, he got it from Bobby Knight, you know, journalism is one step above prostitution. Right. So I say sometimes it's because they're not doing their homework well enough. And it's like, go back and do your research on where we come from. So watch our movies. Like, you don't have to know our music, but just be aware of what's speaking to us or what's thought provoking to us, because now that communication is much better. But I think you answered it pretty well in terms of like, I don't want to be your friend.
Let me give you another layer if I can.
No, go ahead.
These are really sensitive things to talk about, but happy to talk about them. So unexpected.
And we respect you too. So like, that's why we want to ask.
That's why we appreciate it. We know you'll get a real answer from you too.
Yeah.
A lot of people beat around the bush and be like, what's racism? Right?
Well, it was unexpected in my life. I met a guy in 1980 named John Thompson, and we became extremely close friends. I was his lawyer and he was my mentor. Now, I didn't plan it that way. And if you want to hear a great story, years later, everyone wanted to know how John and I came to meet. And so my boss, Donald Dell, thought that he picked our firm for the first two Georgetown guys we had in 1980 because of Donald's reputation. Coach Smith said that he had recommended to John that he use us because he used us for the Carolina guys. It turns out that when John played for the Celtics for 2 years, when he left Providence in 1960, he made $5,000 a year playing basketball, pro basketball.
Wow.
And he couldn't afford a place to live. He was about to get married. So he lived with a childless family in Boston named Harold and Marty Furash. My wife is from Boston, and her father was golf buddies with Harold Furash. So when John got the job at Georgetown in 73, I just finished my first year of law school. And Harold told John, I met this young law student who's a sports junkie. He's like a zero in the world of business and sports. and you're a high school coach trying to become a college coach, you guys should beat each other. And John loved Harold Furash. And because of Harold's sort of blessing, like that's how we met. And he, over the next 40 years, was like a mentor to me in many things, but certainly in race relations. And you have to understand, I understand, having represented predominantly African-American players for almost 50 years, that there's a cultural difference in America that most white people don't even understand there is a difference, not what the difference is, but I learned that there was a difference. And John became my mentor. He was like, if I was going to climb Mount Everest, the number one thing you need is a Sherpa guide. That guy knows where every rock is and every crevice in the thing. If you want to get to the top of Everest, John was like a Sherpa guide for me in race relations. And whenever I was confused or had questions, we'd have these intense conversations. So I'll tell you the very first one we ever had. In 1983, my daughter was born, and a week later, our firm split up. It was into two companies. One was called ProServe, the other became known as Octagon later on down the road. And it was like chaos. It was chaos. And I knew that I needed to hire another lawyer in my staff because we lost a couple of people. Jeff Austin, who I just hired, who's Steph's guy. I love Jeff. Great guy. He left and went with the other group. And so I met a lawyer giving a speech in Houston named William Strickland. The guy played college basketball and college baseball at Loyola Marymount, got drafted by the Dodgers. He had a law degree from Georgetown and an MBA from UCLA. Way better credentials than I had. And so he applied for a job. I'm driving home from work one day. I stopped by Georgetown on the way home. I'm sitting outside McDonough Gym with John just shooting the breeze. And out of left field, he says to me the following: "What do you think of this guy, Strickland?" I said, "Wow, John, the guy's got great credentials. I gave him all the stuff I just told you." And he said, "David, I'm not asking for a freaking obituary. I want to know you're going to hire the guy." And I said, I really don't know. And he said, "Well, why wouldn't you hire him?" And I said, I really don't understand it, but our clients, it's very important to our clients that we hire a Black attorney. We have Black marketing people, we have Black accountants, but for some reason, it's symbolic for some reason that we have a lawyer who's African-American. And I know that whoever you hire, the first guy is going to be under the spotlight. So I just want to make sure it's the right guy. And I thought that was very dispassionate, logical. And he looks at me and says, "That's the best you got?" He said, "People have been keeping Black people out of jobs for 200 years for exactly that kind of reason." Holy wow. System. That was like my way. I thought we were having like a light, casual conversation. He's like punching me in the jaw. So we got into this intense conversation about hiring Bill Strickland. And after like 20 minutes, John's so smart. Whatever I said, he's like cutting me to ribbons and making me look what I said look ridiculous. And I was so frustrated, I was about to cry. And I knew that in 20 minutes, I just destroyed 3 years of building a relationship with this guy. And it was over. And at the depths of my despair, I was literally about to break into tears. He puts his hands on my shoulder like a priest. And he says, "David, I don't give a flying fuck if you hire Bill Strickland, but you should understand that I'm 6'10" and I'm Black. You're Jewish. People have been excluding Jewish people from work for hundreds of years, but no one knows you're Jewish when they meet you. When they meet me and I'm 6'10", 300, they know I'm Black. And I just want you to be sensitive to that." So I got into my Volkswagen Rabbit, which I was driving at the time. I drove home, and without sounding dramatic, it was like being touched by God. If he had said anything but the close, I would have been angry because I thought what I was saying was logical. It's true that he's going to be in the spotlight. I ain't putting him in the spotlight. It's just society is going to put that first guy in the spotlight. Right. And I wanted to make sure that he was going to be the right guy, that he didn't fail. But he did it with such kindness and whatever. First, he beat me up, and then he made me understand. And we had 100 conversations like that over the next 40 years. And so while I don't claim to be an expert in, African-American culture, I had a guy who cared enough about me to be a good guide, to point out things that I would never have thought of on my own. And I feel, I wish every person in life on both sides of the aisle, so to speak, could have a person that pointed those kinds of things out to you, because that's how you learn. I would never have learned that stuff in 100 years on my own by watching or listening. And no one, he has such a forceful personality that I respected him so much that he completely changed my life. And I wrote in my book, I'll finish the story. I wrote in my book something that was obvious to everyone who knows me, that John was the most influential man in my life. And when someone mailed him the chapter in the book on him, they didn't mail him the whole book. They just somehow, so he called me up one day and said, I read the chapter in your book about me. I didn't read the book, and I'm not going to read the book, but I just read the chapter about me, and I want to thank you for what you said in the book about me. That was very flattering. And I said, well, John, that can't be a surprise to you. I mean, after knowing me for 35 years, it can't be a surprise that that's how I felt. And he said, will you shut up for a minute? You never get me. Let me tell you what I'm trying to tell you. He said, when a white person of your success level says that a black man has been the most influential person in his life, that is life-changing. And I said, I really appreciate you saying that, but that's not why. I wasn't writing it to make a social commentary. I was writing it like saying, I worked for Evan for 5 years. Just factual. Everyone who knows me knows as much as I love Michael and as much as I love Patrick, that John was someone very special in my life, maybe because of his age or whatever. And I was flattered that it meant that much to him, because he meant so much to me.
That's perfect. That's beautiful.
That's beautiful, man. And I've been around Big John, and like I felt his presence, and I was like, whoa. It's only like a few people that I felt that presence from, and it was Obama and it was him and MJ, of course. But like the way I didn't expect it from Big John. I'm like, I just sit here and shut up. Like, wait, tell me where to go next. He wasn't even my coach.
No, but I remember.
I'll share another one with you, Dre. This is really for you because of all our sort of union talks. So Buck Williams, who's one of my clients, became the president of the union. I love Buck Williams, salt of the earth guy.
Yeah, I know Buck. Yep.
Simon Gordine was running the union back then, and they told him that he should fire me because it didn't look appropriate for a black player who's the president of the union to have a white lawyer advising him. Now, that really bothered me. So I called John. I just wanted to get his opinion. John's not God, but he was God to me in many ways. And when I told him that, I thought he was going to blow a gasket. He said, does David Stern have lawyers? I said, he's got about 400 lawyers in a prosecutor. He said, why is it okay for a white person to have 400 lawyers and it makes them look smart? But when a black man has one guy who's very trusted in his circle, everyone wants to pull him away from his. He said, that's racism. Which is how I felt. I thought that it was racism for Simon Gordine to tell Buck Williams that it demeans his presence to have who at the time was the #1 agent in the country representing him. Now, Michael never felt that way, or Patrick Ewing, or John Thompson, or Coach K, or anyone. It's why the union was so unsuccessful. No one in the world doesn't want to have the smartest people around them. I do.
Yeah, but Falk, at the same time, when you break down, we're missing a big part of it, because the second you break it down, you go into a sports agency. I'm not trying to knock it, because there's a lot of the bad ones and there's good ones. You go in a sports agency, we can argue that Andre Iguodala came from Springfield. He literally worked his way up to make him a $20, $30 million player. You understand what I'm saying? And when you break it down, after you look after a 4-year deal or whatever, you might meet somebody that legit took most of your fortune and also told you to stay away from this person, that person, and the third. You know what I mean? So I think a lot of times our culture is skeptical of a businessman or anybody, because historically we always gotten screwed by the system or those that look like people in your suit. So
we can't even identify what the proper management looks like
at all at the end of the day. It's a historical disenfranchisement just every day. That's life for us, to tell you the truth.
But I think that most athletes of any color have no idea what they need when they go into business, what they need to hire. And so when you asked me the question 6 years ago, who should we have as the head of the union? I didn't tell you a person necessarily. I gave you a job description, what I thought that person needed to do. And from the day the cap came in 1982, okay, to 2022, that's 40 years. I don't think the union has ever properly educated its clientele that the number one responsibility of the union is to grow the business. It's not to fight the league of whether the shorts are 1 inch over your knee or training camp 6 or 7 days. That's minutia. The main thing, and the same is my job. My job is to take a guy who's worth 20 million, Evan, or take a guy like Patrick Ewing as a rookie, where the market is 1.2 million established by Olajuwon, and get him 3.2 million. Okay, that's my job, is to have value added. Your job on the court, when you guys are making 10, 20, 30, 40, $50 million, is to, the same thing, is to be a better player at 50 million than a guy's making 10. And if you're not better than the guy's making 10, you're not adding more to the pie, then you're not worth the 50. And so sometimes it's hard to measure those things, but I would never want to work for someone and feel that I was taking their money. I always felt that I added value. Yeah. I always felt I was worth way more than the client was legally allowed to pay.
Now I will go into, you know, and we'll wrap it up on this. Evan and I is big on gatekeeping.
Yeah.
Like, exactly. You know, you have, we call it the gatekeepers, like the gatekeeping.
Okay.
Like, you know, like as a player, you know, the high IQ guys, those should be the guys that are in the competition committee, setting the rules, setting the standards. It's like, okay, we say who's the MVP of the league, not someone who's never played the game or who's the best defensive player in the league. Like, we call it gatekeeping. Like, you know, certain guys can't speak on other guys because you're just not at their level. You know, any former player who's speaking or commentating for ESPN or TNT, those should be gatekeepers, not just anybody. And it's like, we're building a collective, and we had Chris Aaron, who wrote Blood in the Garden on the Knicks in the 90s. And we talked about journalism needs to have gatekeepers. So I feel like there's the same thing needs to happen in the agency business where there's gatekeeping, because I mean, there's 450 players in the league, but I think there's like 350 certified agents. Like, there's none of them. The majority of y'all don't have a client. Yeah. Don't have clients. So like,
but Falk's he's gonna blame the union because of the restrictions, right? They raised the restrictions.
I think the union, which has started in 1986 to regulate the agents, could not have done a worse job of regulating the agents if they tried. They allow agencies to represent management and players. There's not a law firm in America that would allow itself to represent the United Auto Workers and General Motors and tell them that they have a Chinese wall. They'd be disbarred. I think there's rampant cheating on in business. I don't care anymore. I haven't signed a guy in 4 years, and I don't want to. But as someone whose life has been enhanced by basketball, I'm very grateful to the game. I would like to see it improve. I think the players need better agents / business managers, whatever it is they need to be better educated. And I think most of the people who do this business, do you understand that today they give an open book test to new agents on the regulations? You know what the failure rate is? 50%. Now, if they gave a closed book, if they took every agent today.
Crazy. The book is open.
It's open, man.
If they gave them a closed book test today, I don't think there are 5 agents that could pass it. And so that's how many agents should be certified. The ones that
you give me some homework. You've given me some homework.
I think you could pass it. Dre, I think you could pass it. And I'm not saying that because I'm angry.
No, it makes sense.
I'm saying it because I care about players. I spent my whole life caring for players and managing players. And I think that the standards are so low that it attract a bunch of people that I would let manage my parking space.
I think that's a beautiful time to wind it down. And we got some knowledge, and we're going to continue to have these conversations, because I got something for you that it hasn't been quite released yet, but you'll be hearing some big news on some things I'm going to be doing in one of these sectors of business within sports.
I'd like to do something with you. I'm telling you over the air.
Nice. But I got some homework now. You know, we're gonna try to find some gatekeepers for the agency business, and I'll be circling back with you on, you know, what we need to do. So I really appreciate your time. I hope everyone got a lot of knowledge in history, because, you know, reverence is big for me. That's one of the, you know, if I had, you know, like a 16, you know, pillar, you know, statue or type of structure, one of those is called reverence. And I read that in, I think it was The Seed of the Soul, or was it, I forgot the name of the book, but reverence is knowing your history and having a respect for it, knowing how you got to where you're at. And we're getting further and further away from that with all this information being at our disposal with these smartphones. So appreciate you bringing that reverence back to us and giving our listeners, you know, the in-depths of, you know, some things they never see that happens in the business of the game. And we're going into Web3. I always talk about crypto. So I got some things up my sleeve. So I appreciate all the, you know, all the ways that you've kind of put my brand up in terms of how I conduct myself, and Evan's doing the same thing. We're working together. We're business partners in this thing as well. So we appreciate your time.
I really, from the bottom of my heart, I really respect what you're doing. You know that. I mean, Evan, I don't know if you know this, but we have a client on his team, Otto Porter, is our very last client in the NBA.
Yeah, I know Otto, of course.
Last of the Mohegans. And when he got there, I called two guys. I called Dre and Draymond. I said, I'm going to put my guy on your team. I love you guys. I respect you guys. Keep an eye, like an older brother, keep an eye on my guy. I love Otto.
Shit, you talking about Jordan and Iverson? You called two different. you called two different spectrums.
Well, exactly. But I think, you know, the two guys who I really like and respect, who aren't clients. I'm a big fan of yours, Dre. I think that you are a role model for what players forget basketball, how they should use basketball as a vehicle to round themselves out, meet different people that can enhance. Most players wait way too long when the career's over to start building relationships. And you've done that early in your career, which is really, really unusual and something that I really admire. I love that Evan's getting into business. You know, we talked the other day about doing the truck business, the podcast. You know, I think basketball is a platform. I know for me, when I started, think about this, because we talked a lot about agents. By definition, an agent should be a behind-the-scenes person. And somehow, between Jerry Maguire and Arliss and some of these shows, agents sort of come to the forefront, and they become like person. I don't necessarily believe in that.
It's like the refs.
I don't think it should have happened. In Hollywood, when I was making Space Jam, Bob Daly and Terry Semple, who ran Warner Brothers, told me that in the day, if you were a Hollywood agent, and let's say you two guys are actors, and we're at a table having lunch, and a photographer comes up, I got to duck under the table because I don't belong in the picture. If I'm in the picture, I'm going to get fired. I'm a behind-the-scenes guy. And so the idea that people would know agents and agents could become, you know, personalities in their own right, something that I never thought about, never thought could happen. But I want to, just like you using it, I want to use it I have my own college at Syracuse in my name. I teach sports management. I have my own division of law school in Washington. I teach negotiation. And I try to use my relationship with people like Evan, who's the National Player of the Year, or Michael or Pat or all these people, to try to do things that in a million years I never thought I could do if I was a lawyer working at a law firm trying cases. Nobody would allow me to do the kinds of things that I've done. So I'm very grateful to my clients for putting me in this position. I'm grateful to the game. And I've become a purist as I've gotten older. It's not that I'm an angry old person. It's that I respect the game so much for what it's done for me and my family that I want to feel like that I'm going to contribute, you know, even when I'm not representing players.
I respect it. So I appreciate your reverence, our speech. Appreciate your passion for the space. And once again, thanks for coming on. So until next time.
Been a pleasure.